Hi, and welcome to the OT is In, the podcast where we merge the worlds of education and occupational therapy to empower families like yours. I'm Sarah Collins, your host, an occupational therapist and a homeschooling parent. I've experienced occupational therapy by supporting families for over 15 years, but also through seeking out support of my own children, so I'm right here in the trenches with you. Though there is not one way to educate your child, there is a lot to consider when individualizing an education. And the goal of this podcast is to explain some of the why behind what an occupational therapist is thinking so you can apply it to your own family. Especially with my three favorite topics: executive functioning, handwriting, and sensory processing. Each episode will be packed with practical tips, expert interviews, and real-life stories aimed at helping you to create a supportive learning environment for your child. So, grab your headphones and get ready to dive in of the collision of education and occupational therapy. I'm Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT, and I'm thrilled to have you with me on this journey of discovery. Hey, and welcome back to the OT is In podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Collins, and today we are diving into a topic that's been creating a lot of buzz in the homeschooling community. Well, actually, the topic of education in America affects all Americans, so it's not just the homeschooling community. But if you've been recently feeling anxious about changes in administration and what that means for your homeschool journey, you're not alone. Or if you have been anxious thinking about what the new administration might mean for your public school community, and you're beginning to consider homeschooling, again, you're not alone. Joining me today is Cheri K. Sessions. She's a representative from the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, also known as HSLDA. She's also an experienced homeschooling mom. Cheri shares her own homeschooling journey, the importance of educational choice, and she offers insights into navigating legal concerns and accessing resources to support your homeschooling experience. So whether you're considering homeschooling, new to homeschooling, or a seasoned veteran, this episode is packed with valuable information to help you feel more confident and supported in your educational choices. So let's dive in and address some of those burning questions. Thanks for being here. Hey, and welcome back to the OT is In. Before we dive into today's episode, let's talk about something that can make your homeschooling journey a whole lot easier. As homeschoolers, we know that government policies can bring a lot of questions for parents. That's why we're doing this special episode. And for homeschooling parents, these questions can multiply, especially when you're figuring out how to meet your child's unique educational needs. And if you are a homeschooling parent seeking OT services for your child, we know it can feel downright overwhelming to figure out where to start and who to trust. So that's why we created the OT Service Provider Guide. This guide breaks it all down. It helps you find the right service providers, ask the right questions, and feel confident in supporting your child. So visit homeschoolot.com/shop to grab your copy today, or it's also linked in the show notes. And let's work together to make your homeschooling journey a success for you and your child. Hey, and welcome back to the OT is In. My name is Sarah Collins, and I'm here with an HSLDA representative. Her name is Cheri K. Sessions. And we are going to dive a little bit differently into, most of the time on this podcast, I'm talking all about occupational therapy and how we can support our students. But there's been a lot of fear recently, a lot of questions that I'm getting from parents about what's going to be happening with a new administration, most of which we don't know that answer. But I do want to reach out and say, here's the questions I'm getting. Let's see if we can figure out at least some answers and or how we can get support throughout this beginning of our new terms here. Cheri K., can you go ahead and tell us who you are, where you are? And I know that's changing quite a bit, but share that
Yes.
with this great audience that we've got here.
Yeah, so my name is Cheri K. I am a homeschooling mom. I have 4 kids. They are all adopted. I have 2 adult children adopted from Haiti. I have a 10-year-old adopted from China, and then a 3-year-old adopted through the foster care system. I started homeschooling when my oldest had, let's say we didn't have great experiences with the IEP process. Let's just put it that way.
We'll go
Um,
there.
we could have a whole podcast on that. She's profoundly deaf as well as has other disabilities on top of that. So I started homeschooling when she was in sixth grade. My son remained actually in a brick and mortar school. He went through a performing arts middle
Amazing.
school
Mhm.
and high school, and that worked great for him. I am currently homeschooling my 10-year-old who's also deaf. And then the baby will also be homeschooled, excuse me, and she has a severe cardiac condition, so she has medical issues that we deal with. We have a little bit of everything in our
Yeah,
house.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm a physical therapist by trade and have moved into a little bit of homeschool consultations. I've done that with HSLDA and working alongside HSLDA to help promote and make sure that homeschooling is available to all of us as a
Mhm.
choice. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And educational choice is so important. This is one of the things so many times I talk to families who are scared about either being in the public school system or scared about not being in the public school system. Just knowing that there are choices is wonderful, but it's also no one wants to do the wrong thing. So I often tell parents there's not one right way to educate, but the way that's working for our families is the right way to educate. And that's pretty much what you've gone through with your kids. You've
Yes.
tried different things and some that worked for others, some didn't work, right?
Yep. Yep.
So,
And I remember that day that I pulled my big girl
mhm,
and I
terrifying.
got home from that IEP that I finally just said I'm done.
Mhm.
And I had dropped the letter of intent on the desk
Table,
as I
yeah.
walked out.
Hmm.
And then I got home and I thought, oh dear, what have I done? I know that feeling of, can I really do this homeschool thing? And I just remember like the fear that was there. And now I'm 9 years past that and really glad I did it.
Yeah, yeah. But what was your first step when you felt all of that fear? What was the first thing you did? So that let's just pretend it's on Tuesday. You wake up Wednesday morning and
Yeah.
what do you do?
On I know this is going to sound a little cliche because I work at HSLDA, but I honestly became a member of HSLDA as my
Boom.
first step
Hmm.
because I wanted that legal support of what do I do and how do
Yeah,
I do this right. The next thing I did was I sat down with my kid and I just followed her lead. We had a very disabled young lady who was going through a very difficult time and really had no capacity for being told what to do,
yeah,
basically, right? So I really honestly, I hung out with her and I followed her lead and I made everything she wanted to do somehow educational. And
beautiful.
at the moment, we had just brought home her little sister from China, and she wanted to know about China. So I did a unit study, and I used unit studies, and we read about China, we wrote about China, we did geography of China, we learned map skills from looking at
Yeah,
China, we did all the things
yeah,
with China. So I got every single
beautiful.
subject while she thought, mom thinks I don't, mom wants me to learn and I'm not going to school and I'm not learning.
Yep.
Meanwhile, she really did. And and once we got through China, she wanted to do the same thing with Haiti, which is where she's from.
Yeah,
So we did. And we continued to do map skills and we continued to do geography and the different landforms and the different temperatures and weather and all the
yeah.
things. You don't, there are some states that require curriculum but you can still use that curriculum as a guide and follow your child's lead. And that's what I did. And we now have a little bit more, we're not unit study based only, but that's what she needed at the time.
And there's an ebb and flow within homeschooling. I think there's oftentimes that people will be like, "What kind of homeschooler are you?" And I'm like, "It depends on my kid at that time of where they are."
Yeah.
There's been a time that we were very classically oriented. There's been a time where we've needed a lot of, "I'm just going to follow you." We've done so where we're more of an unschooling approach.
Mhm.
There's been a time where we've done a whole lot of reading, and it just there's such an ebb and flow, which is
Mm.
the beauty and the hardship. Again, I just keep talking. There's the beauty and the hardship that we do have that freedom, but sometimes there's so many resources and so much out there. And there's am I doing enough? Am I doing enough? Am I doing enough? And that's at the back of our minds so
All the time.
frequently. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So, right now, again, we are in this transition time of a new administration coming in, and I want to hold space for lots of different viewpoints here. I'm going to state some of the things that I've heard. I'm going to make sure that I say, like, none of this is coming specifically from me. However, I have heard many different viewpoints that I want to make sure that we hold space for all of them, right? So, I'm going to lay some out there and let's talk through. So, one is there are many people that I've talked to that are very excited about a new administration coming in and the potential of educational freedom and what that could look like financially, even for families. There are some on the flip side of that are like within educational freedom and tax cuts, and that could mean that the government has tied our hands with money and there's strings attached. So that's a piece. Again, two very similar thoughts, but on the opposite ends
Yeah.
of one conversation. I've also heard things like if we get rid of the Department of Education, there's going to be no funding for special needs families. And so our political or our population within the homeschool community is going to grow and skyrocket. I've also heard people on the other side of that of, wait, when we cut down with the Department of Education, there's going to be more educational freedom. So do you see what I mean? There's just so much right now of we don't know. So can you calm us a little?
I'll do the best I can. So I want to start with if you have a lot of questions about how this is going to be, HSLDA has great lawyers. And if you're an HSLDA member as a homeschooler, you can always call the legal team for your state and they will talk you through this. I also had a short conversation with one of our legal team and we talked about this a little bit. And so the big takeaway is that with the conversation about the Department of Education, those laws are on the books. If the Department of Education is dissolved, the laws along with it are not dissolved. They get
Interesting.
absorbed by different departments within the government. So, in order for the education laws to go away, they're going to have to go through Congress. And it's going to, and then you have all those things that get really, I am not a lawyer. I'm not going to speak to that. But we all know how complicated it is to change a
Mhm.
law. And so, dissolving the Department of Education, say we wake up tomorrow and it's gone, that doesn't mean all the laws that they are working on are gone. They're
Are
still
gone.
there. They're
Okay.
still there. They're just going to be absorbed by other departments to track and take care of. Now, could there be delays and all the things with that? I'm sure there's complications and pros and cons to that. But the Department of Education has not always been a part of our government. It's a newer department,
Okay.
not 2 years old, but like
Mhm.
it's, and we still had education. It's just going to look different, but of how things are managed, but the laws remain the same.
Okay.
And then on top of that, the Department of Education gives minimum requirements to our states, but the state itself, the state and local government are the ones that actually truly influence the public schools in your area. They have to meet minimum standards that the federal government has put into place, but all of everything comes from your state and local government, which is why your state and local governments are just as important, if not more so, than our federal elections. I think while the fears are there, I was assured through our conversations at HSLDA that these laws aren't just going to go away.
Mhm.
It will
Mhm.
take time. They could be changed in many different ways that could be very helpful or not. And it just depends, but it's not going to happen overnight. You're not going to see this happen in a week
Okay.
or a
Okay.
day. So I think that's important. And then you mentioned something about religious.
Yes, that is another thing that I have heard frequently
Yeah.
about. There are some states right now that are starting to pass things about having the Ten Commandments posted and reading the Bible and things like that. And the exact quote that I heard was actually when Trump starts turning schools back into churches.
Oh,
So
that's what you said. Okay.
yeah, what? What can we say to these families that are saying that's not necessarily what I want? Should I be
Sure,
in?
sure. I think I don't have a crystal ball, and neither
Mhm.
does any of the legal or lawyers or anybody out there.
Right.
But I do think that our Constitution is very clear about the separation of church and
Church and
state.
state.
And
Right.
so to get to a point where schools would be turned into churches, I think that would be a very layered process. And then the Constitution stops that.
Is null would be
It's
null
kind
and
of
void
there.
if that was happening. Right.
Yeah, I think that might be a conversation for a legal scholar to see what that might actually be able to, like, what could actually change or be done. I think sometimes what happens, and I know it happens to me, as I'm scrolling through on my phone or
Hmm.
Facebook, I'm
Hmm.
only reading headlines.
Yeah.
And so that headline might spark fear in me, but when I then take the time to look into it further, you're like, oh, okay. I see the possibility that could happen or not happen or whatever. But I think sometimes our fears come from our fast-paced life
Yeah.
and the information that is always just bombarding us, but it's only sometimes not the whole information. And it's hard to get full information, and it's hard to go and understand how making a law works, and it's very complicated.
Well, and even when I
Yeah.
was telling you some of these things that I'm hearing, you can, on both sides, you can see the exact same. We come from the
Yes.
spot in the middle of, wait,
Uh-huh.
there, the Department of Education could not be there or whatever. And then on one side, there's a whole lot of fear for special education. And on the other side, there's a whole lot of absolutely, there's going to be great freedom there. So from one headline, you get so many different avenues to go. So
Yes.
I agree with you that we get conflicting information and it's really hard to know what to
Yes.
think.
Yes. But I think it's important to know that things aren't going to change overnight
Yeah,
either
I
way.
think
And
that's
then
a
if
key
you
point.
start, it is. And if you start to see things happening that you're not feeling comfortable with, that's when you contact your representatives and your
Mhm.
senators. You reach out to HSLDA, who's working behind the scenes in this legislative season to help legislators with their bills and advocating for homeschool rights and freedoms. And if you want to, you just have to stay involved locally with
Mhm.
your
Mhm.
local representatives, and that's where you're going to get the biggest impact, because like I said, the laws aren't just going to go away. So
Right.
make sure if you feel like you there's a specific thing happening, to reach out to your representative and senator or whoever's involved with that process to get your voice heard on how you're feeling about that.
Love that. You know, my close personal friends often joke that homeschoolers don't make decisions in February. It's too cold, too dark, too dreary. Any change feels like a risk that we will regret. But let's be real, sometimes February is exactly when we need a change. I remember February of 2018 like it was yesterday. My daughter, a fifth grader at the time, looked at me after yet another frustrating math lesson and said, "We just can't do math together." She might have said it a little more rudely, but we're just going to keep it at that. And she was right. Our brains just weren't meshing, and math had turned into tears for both of us. And that's when we made the switch to CTC Math, an open and go online program that changed everything. CTC Math offers video tutorials that are short, clear, and easy to follow. They're perfect for kids who need concepts explained in a way that really clicks. Plus, with their flexible pacing and interactive practice, it's great for families juggling different ages and different learning needs. And what's more, parents get detailed progress reports so that you always know how your child is doing without hovering over their shoulder. Since 2018, CTC Math has been a game changer for our family, and it might just be the change that your family needs too. So head to ctcmath.com to learn more and to start a free trial. And let's make math one less thing to stress about. I love that. Now, what you and I were talking about before this, even before we started recording, was that both of us very much feel that however you get to homeschooling, whether it is because this has been a desire for your entire life, or whether it just happened like it did for my family, or whether it was I have to pull my student out like it was for your family, and the plethora of other reasons. Like those are just a
Right.
few, but the plethora of other reasons, you're all in the same spot. So what we want to do is make sure that you are supported now that you're here, now that you are homeschooling. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do to support and what HSLDA does to support homeschoolers now that they're here and how we can make sure that all these, if there are boatloads of new people coming in, like
Yeah.
again, some of the rumor mill has been, how can we support our
Yeah.
community?
And that's the beauty. I even see now the difference between now and 9 years ago when I started, the different amount of resources available to homeschool families, the different choices of curriculum. There's so much more online.
Mhm.
There's so many more classes. We can talk about how horrible COVID was, but what it did teach us was what we could do virtually.
Yeah,
It taught us how much we can do with Zoom and Teams and virtual and all those things.
yeah.
And so I think that we've learned a lot from that. And there's online schooling, there's online therapy now, there's just so much more out there. And so
Mhm.
homeschoolers can get their fingers into almost anything that they need, whether it's a co-op in your area, virtual group, social group, all the things. So HSLDA has resources on their webpage for members. You can find a co-op group near you
Mhm.
under our groups list. You can call in and look for resources. There's resources on our website. I don't know if you've ever been on our website, but it's like a very multi-layered novel. There's so much in there.
I
It's
always
it's a
send
bit
people there
overwhelming
first because I love what you were talking about. Like your very first thing you did was to become a member. When I'm talking to new homeschool families, I'm like, the very first thing you need to do is to make sure that you are legal in your state.
for
And
sure.
I do not know every single state's laws. I know basically my own state's laws, but there's a easy list on HSLDA's website as
Yes.
far as, okay, here it is in Virginia, here it is in Pennsylvania, here it is in Wyoming, whatever.
Yes.
But just
Absolutely.
make sure that you're following the law. Then
Absolutely.
start diving into, okay, so what are all my other resources and how am I
Yes.
going to support my
Yep.
child?
And there's consultants out there, educational consultants that work specifically with homeschoolers. Many of us at HSLDA do that.
Mm.
Homeschooling consultants that are more general. Some of us are special education focused. SPED Homeschool is a great resource for kids with special needs. There's consultants for the military, for military
Right.
families that have experience with that. There's consultants. So HSLDA has, they do not know every single consultant out
Right.
there, but they can get you some resources and names, especially if you'd like to talk to somebody to help set up your program at home or kind of guide you or answer questions or relieve some of the stress
Right.
with that.
And
You
guys,
know,
that is a
so
big part of what I do here at Homeschool OT. Obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you hear me talk about all the different ways that occupational therapy and homeschooling intertwine. But
yeah,
one of the main parts that I do is work specifically with families on what it is that you and your child need to do to occupy their time. That's your occupation, and how we can help them to do so using the
yeah,
homeschool.
absolutely, absolutely. So regardless of what happens with everything, I think we're at a point where there's so many resources out there
Mhm.
to find exactly what works for you,
Right.
because that's what matters. It
Yes.
doesn't matter how my homeschool day looks, which is very different with my 10-year-old than it was with my daughter when she was younger.
Right.
That homeschool day looks very different than what it does now,
Mhm.
and for different reasons. And there's no right way to homeschool.
Don't do it
There's
alone
just
because
no
homeschooling is
right
not
way.
alone schooling. There are so many resources
No,
out there.
absolutely. And there's no right way and there's no right day. It looks
Yeah.
different every day, and that's perfect.
Mhm.
Just meet your state rules and have fun.
Right.
That's the thing. But yeah, I think, finding the resources with your podcast, other podcasts, HSLDA, consultants, all those things. And there's lots of things out there. You can get speech therapy online,
Mhm.
OT,
Mhm.
PT consultants. You can get them in your local clinics if you want in person. Like there's just whatever works.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I'm not sure that we solved all the problems of the world, but I think we did at least acknowledge some of the reasons why people are coming to homeschooling right now, and that we literally don't know what is going to happen governmental as we're moving forward with policy, but I think we can feel a little more comfortable knowing that those laws are already on the books. And the first steps within our own homeschoolers for those who are coming in who are
Yeah.
new.
Yeah. And if something is making you nervous, then that's when you
Speak
talk
to
to
your
your senators.
legislatures.
And that's right. That's right. Because that's where the change will happen. It's not just going to like randomly flip.
Yeah,
So
things don't just change, right?
we all know how quickly the government works. So you
Right.
have time to speak to your legislator and have your voice heard. That's your right as
Yes.
an American citizen. Embrace that. Let your
Yeah.
kids see you do that as you homeschool and
Mhm.
embrace all the wonderful that we have as American citizens in getting to share our voices and our opinions and how these laws and regulations affect our lives and what do we want. So
Yeah.
I think that's exciting
I think that's
personally
exciting
that
too. I think that's
yeah.
I think there's many of the states that have state legislature days where kids can come and learn at the state capitol and go
Oh,
through all of what happens there on a day-to-day basis. So if you are
yeah,
involved, if you are thinking about what is going to happen within the government, you're talking about it with your students, then they can see it and this whole thing
yeah,
can come in a full circle. Love
that's
that.
right. Exciting.
Cheri, thank you so much for being here. Can you tell everyone how they can find you?
Yeah, you can find us at www.hslda.org. You can find the educational specialists, go to the drop downs. There's all sorts of resources. If you're a member, there's savings, there's discounts, there's resources you can read online. You can call. If HSLDA does not have the resource, they will at least give you a name and a number to call to help you find
Mhm.
it. So, yeah. And if you do have more specific legal concerns, please do reach out to a legal representative.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of The OT is In. But before you go, I've got some exciting news. Episode 50 is just around the corner, and we're celebrating with a special Q&A session. This is your chance to ask me anything about homeschooling, OT strategies, parenting, or whatever is on your mind. And I'll be answering your questions during the big 50 episode, so don't miss out. Head over to the show notes now to find the link where you can submit your question. I can't wait to hear from you and to make episode 50 something truly special.